Well, hello, welcome again to our reading of the selections from Plato's Symposium, and got up to the section chapter or section 174, just after the first sentence there. So this little section from 174a to d is where Aristodemus encounters Socrates. And Socrates invites Aristodemus to accompany him to Agathon's dinner party. And we get several, references or misquotations from Homer in this little section leading up to the beginning of the dinner party. So, Ephe gar hoi Socrate en tukain lumenon tekai tas blautas hupa dedemenon haikenos oligarchis epoie. Now we're getting lots of this fa, he said, plus accusative infinitives. Now this is Aristodemus speaking to his friend and reporting on what various things he himself and Socrates had said years before. So, for he said that Socrates, I think is the subject of the infinitive, that Socrates had encountered from en tunkano. This is the aorist infinitive. Now, because it's he's speaking, he uses this hoi, which is this reflexive dative here, and it's dative after en tunkano. So he said that Socrates, to have encountered him, literally to have met with him, Socrates having bathed, this is the middle from luo. Luo is I wash someone else, and luomai is I wash myself, and hence I bathed. So he said that he had encountered Socrates, who had bathed and had put on his blaustas. Now I've got a little note here of the shoes, but it's actually, I think, sometimes translated as slippers. They're slightly more formal, fancy clothing. This is from hupedeo, literally to tie underneath, and hence having put on, a verb used of putting on shoes and sandals and things. Things which that man, that is Socrates, epoie, used to do, oligarchis, on few occasions, very occasionally, very rarely. And in fact, it's said elsewhere that Socrates went around barefoot, and he's gone to the trouble of having a bath and putting on good shoes. Kai erestai auton hopoi ioi huto kalos gegenemenos. Now again, we have to understand fa a lot in this. So he said that erestai, he asked, that is, Aristodemus asked out on him, Socrates, hopoi, where ioi is optative, because he says, where are you going, direct speech, and this is then reported. So you put it into the optative here. It's from Amy Ibo, and the root is I, as you see in Latin. So where he might be going, literally having become so good-looking, so handsome. Perfect participle here from gignomai. So we might say having dolled himself up to this extent. Kaiton apain hoti epidepnon es Agathonos. And he said that, so you have to understand fa again, he said that he, that is Socrates, said that, understand, I am going, epidepnon, to for dinner, as Agathonos. Now this is genitive here, of course, so you've got to supply something like oikian, to the house of Agathon, much like in English, we're going to so-and-so's house, or we often just say we're going to so-and-so's. So he said that he, that is Socrates, said that I'm going for dinner at Agathon's. Kthesga auton di ephagon tois epinikios phobethes ton oklon. For kthes is yesterday, diaphugon is from diaphugo. Literally I escaped from him, so perhaps I avoided him almost, at the epinikia. This is the celebratory feast, because Agathon had won first prize in the drama contest, in the dramatic performances. So this was a victory feast. So for yesterday, I avoided him at the victory feast, for Boethes, terrified of the crowd, or frightened of the crowd. So Socrates didn't want to get mixed up with a large crowd of people. Homologesa de es temeran par essesthai. Homologia here is just I agreed, so it's aorist. I agreed that I would be present. This is the future infinitive from parami, that I would be present. This is just as tamer on the next day, so that is today. So he avoided him yesterday because he didn't like the crowd, and I agreed that I would turn up today. Tau today ekalio pisamen hinakalos para kalon io. Now the verb here is kalopisdomai, which is a verb usually used of women putting on makeup. It means to make the face beautiful, often used in Aristophanes, of putting on makeup and so on. So indeed, I have dolled myself up, tauta, in respect of these things. Hina, in order that, eo is subjunctive, again from ami ibo, and there's the I root, that I might go as a handsome man to a handsome man. Now he's being slightly funny here, because one of the things we do know about Socrates was that he was traditionally very unattractive. And of course, on the other hand, Agathon, whose place he's going to, was traditionally very handsome, very attractive. Alasu eidahos pos ekes pros ton ethelein an eonai akletos epidepnon. That's a question. But you, he said, now getting something slightly idiomatic here, it's pos ekes. Echo can have that sense of just to be, and then pros ton ethelein, this is articular infinitive, with regard to being willing to go. So it's something like, well, on what condition are you in respect of being willing to go? So how are you in regard to your willingness, or would you be, to your willingness to go uncalled to the feast? So I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit here. Something really asking, do you wish to go to the feast? Something like, how do you feel about going uninvited, is the key thing, to the feast. Cargo fa apon hoti hutos hopos an su kelues. Now we're getting lots of these verbs of saying here. So the main one here is the fa. So he said, I said. So in other words, he said to me that I, that is Apollodoros, said to Socrates that. Now again, it's slightly elliptic here. We have to supply something like, I will do just as you bid. I will do however you might bid. So I'll do just as you tell me. So he said, understand, to me that he said that I said. We could render it as he said. The reply I gave was, I will do just as you bid. Just to try and get around all these verbs of saying. Hepu toinon fa hinakai ten paroimian diaphteromen metabalontes, hos arakai agathon epidaita siasin tomatoi agathoi. Now this is slightly complicated here because it's a quotation or a saying, a proverb, and there are two versions of this apparently, one a negative one and one a positive one. So the negative one was to say that good men of their own accord go to the feasts of cowards. And the other nicer version is good men of their own accord go to the feasts of good men. And that's the one he's quoting here, but he has in mind the earlier version, that is, good men of their own accord go to the feasts of cowards. And he says here, well, hepu is imperative from hepamai, second person. So follow me then, he said, in order that we might corrupt the proverb, metabalontes, having changed it, hos arakai, which is something like, so that it might say, so that after all, good men of their own accord go to the feasts of good men. For, now he claims that Homer says something slightly different and that he's in some sense improved on what's in Homer. And by the way, there's lots of puns here because they're going to the house of Agathon, so there's lots of puns in here with this use of agathoi and agathon. So he says, Homeros gar kindunue umonon diephterai alakai huprisai es tautan tan paroimia. For Homer runs the risk not only to corrupt, but also, well, to treat with contempt or to speak with contempt with regard to this proverb. Poiesas gar ton Agamemnona diaferontes agathon andra ta polemica, ton de men elion malthekon eik meten. Thusian poiumenai kai hestiontos to Agamemnonos, akleton poiesen, elthonta ton meneleon, epi ten thoinan, kero onta epi ten to amemonos. Now again, this is slightly complicated here. So he says, just literally, for on the one hand, Homer, I've read that bit, so that explains what he means by this. For having made, perhaps having presented Agamemnon as being exceptionally a good man, perhaps eminently good in respect of the things of war, but understand he presents Menelaus as a cowardly spearsman, malthakon eikmeten. Well, Homer doesn't actually do that. This, in the context, it's Iliad 17. It's Paris who calls him that as a taunt. Often when they quote Homer, it's much when people sometimes quote the Bible, they simply take verses completely out of context and just quote the words. You see a lot of that with the quotations from the Old Testament that are in the New Testament, for example, and the Greeks seem to do this. They just pull some words out of Homer out of context. So it wasn't Homer that described him as that, although obviously technically he did, but it's Paris who used this taunt. So he says here then that he's presented Agamemnon as being a very good man and Menelaus as a cowardly spearsman, and then genitive absolute, and then when Agamemnon, having made a feast, this is from Hestiao, and well, it's just another word for feasting or having a celebration. he made, this is Homer, presented Menelaus as having come uninvited to the Thoinan, to the feast, being the worst man, being at the feast of the better man. So you'll need to think about what all that means. He's really having fun with Homer here. And remember, of course, Plato was not a great fan of Homer. He didn't like the way Homer presented the gods. Tautakusas apen ephe, issos mentoi, kindunuso kai ego, uk hos suleges, O Socrates, alacath hemeron phaulos on episophu andros eonai thoinein akletos. Having heard these things, he said, to me that he said to Socrates, perhaps, however, I run the risk also, so there's the emphatic ego, so I also run the risk, not as you say, O Socrates, but in accordance with Homer, that I, being a phaulos, well, phaulos is a hard word to translate, really. Being a poor man, a lesser person, being second rate might be a good translation of this. So being second rate, to go to the feast, to go to the feast of a a wise man, uninvited. So he's saying, well, perhaps Homer got it right after all, and perhaps that's my situation, that being a second-rate man, I'm going uninvited to the feast of a wise man. Ora un, this is an imperative. Hora un agon me ti apologese, hos ego men uk homologeso akletos hekain al hupasu ke klemenos. So therefore, the ti apologese, so it's look then as to what excuse you will make bringing me along, since I, on the one hand, I will not agree, hekein, that I have come akletos, uninvited, but understand that I have come, having been invited, having been called by you, having been invited by you. Now, in the next little sentence here, or two, we have again a misquotation from Homer, or a part quotation. You can see the editors put it in spaced out letters to indicate this. So it's sun dedu efe komeno pro hodu bulius sometha hoti erumen al eomen. So he said, and now he's misquoting here, it's something like, if two going along together, this is a dual from Urkamai. So if two going along together, now the rest of the quotation from Homer is to say so if two go together, one has an idea before the other. Now this comes from Iliad 10, where Diomedes asks Nestor that someone should go with him into the enemy territory, into the enemy camp. And he says, since when two go together, one has an idea before the other. Now we're not getting that here. We've got the first part, when two go together, pro hodu is literally something like further on the way, and then he finishes the quotation with different words. We will take counsel as to whatsoever we will say. So if they question, why is this guy here, then we'll have to make up something on the way to explain why he's come uninvited. So again, rather odd here, but this is what they do. They misquote. They're being clever, misquoting parts of Homer and then finishing it off in a slightly different way. So it's literally, he said, if two go together, further on the way, we will take counsel as to whatsoever thing we will say. And then we get al eomen. This is a hortatory subjunctive from Amy Ibo again. There's the iota. Allah by itself, especially at the beginning of a sentence, often means just come. So come, eomen, let us go. And this is the bit leading up to their arrival at Agathon's.